Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're still rolling, aren't we?
Still rolling, yes.
This is Duncan. This is Duncan's back. Don't do that. Don't do that. We can't put that on YouTube. Kia ora koutou and welcome to Experience Bar, where we're turning video games into cocktails. My name is Jack and I'll be your bartender for this evening as I show you how to make a drink that's a little bit familiar but also a little bit mysterious. The Black Pyramid inspired by Control. Let's get started. Control is best described as a game that would be Alan Wake mixed with a whole bunch of the SCP Foundation. There's the familiar things that are corrupted by interdimensional and extraordinary and supernatural creatures, and that gives us a lot of stuff to play with when we're making a cocktail around it. We could go with the hiss, the main enemies of the game. We could do something around the abilities that you get, like the ability to fly or the ability to yeet things. But I kind of wanted to go with something that's a little bit more unusual, a little bit more mysterious. And that to me is the board, that kind of enigmatic black pyramid kind of creature that seems to have an awful lot of control, if not over the bureau, but then at least over the director of the bureau who you play. So I decided to make a drink that's a little bit familiar, a little bit mysterious. And to make it, we're going to start off with a shaker, half filled with ice, and 2 ounces of barreled gin. Yes, this is a gin that has been aged in barrels, much like a whiskey would. And fun fact, this is actually what used to happen to gin back in the day, back when it was still Genever, that's Genever, when it was kind of a Dutch thing before the British, as we like to do, co-opted it. So people used to chuck it into barrels and let it age, and it creates kind of this weird mix of herbaceousness and that kind of woody whiskey flavor. It's very unusual and it's entirely unique. Next, we are going to add 3/4 of an ounce of sweet red vermouth. Now, you can use any vermouth that you like. The one that I'm using today is by Reed and Reed. The barrel gin is also by Reed and Reed. If you haven't heard of them, that is because they are a New Zealand company that creates some really cool stuff. We aren't sponsored by them, but if you guys are watching this and you want to sponsor us, get in touch. But this vermouth, being a New Zealand vermouth, has a bunch of New Zealand only ingredients like kawa kawa. But it also has like orris root and licorice root and angelica in there, a whole bunch of other like standard stuff, but it does have some unique flavors. If you can't get this, you can use another red vermouth, like Martini Rosso is perfectly fine. And we are going to finish this off with 2 dashes of orange bitters. People who are paying attention will know that we are now working with basically a Manhattan. It's got 2 ounces of spirit, 3/4 of an ounce of red vermouth, and a couple dashes of what is normally Angostura bitters. We're using orange bitters though, because it matches up better with the gin. And I kind of wanted to do that to make a classic familiar drink, but make it in a new way so that it doesn't taste anything like it. So if someone were to sip it, they'd be like, what is this drink? What is going on here? Much like we kind of do with the board and a lot of things in Control. We have got one last ingredient to add, which is going to add the black part to our black pyramid. And that is activated charcoal. Now, I have to warn you, a lot of people say you shouldn't drink activated charcoal, and I kind of agree with them, you shouldn't. Simply because it's quite hard to get and relatively expensive. It won't hurt you in the amounts that we're putting in here, but if you were to drink like a teaspoon of this stuff like a day in a smoothie, yeah, that can end up like doing some damage. So it doesn't really change the flavor, it just changes the color. So basically I'm saying don't make a habit of drinking like a bunch of these if you're gonna put the activated charcoal in. So just a teeny tiny itsy bitsy little bit of that. Like legitimately a very small amount. You'll see this in the close-ups, because if you put too much of this stuff in, despite the fact this is very, very powdered and it will dissolve nicely, it can end up being a little bit gritty. In fact, this is probably too much, but I'm just being extra certain that we get that nice pitch black when we make our drink. So, teeny tiny bit of that. Just pop it in. And now, this being a purely alcohol drink, we are going to stir it rather than shake. Okay, we're done. So, we're just going to pop that to the side for a moment and grab our glass. Now we're using a martini glass because it's got that nice like triangular pyramid shape. Ideally you would get a very, very sharp bottomed martini glass, so you get that nice point, but those are actually quite hard to find because they're a real buggered up clean. So very few manufacturers make them like that. They actually put a little dimple at the bottom to make it like easier to clean, which means that you get kind of a rounded bottom to our pyramid. But hey, we make do with what we got. So we are going to strain this in. I am going to double strain. Normally you don't need to with a stirred drink because it's a little bit less violent than shaking, but I am using a julep strainer here. I don't have my hawthorn with me today, so I'm just being extra careful because I want this to be a nice clean drink. And strain it on in. Grand. And you may have noticed that I have got a nice rim to our pyramid here. That is actually icing sugar. I took a little bit of inspiration from what's called a brandy cruster. My director has told me not to call it a brandy cruster on camera because it reminds him of something disgusting. Personally, I think that's immature, so I'm gonna say it anyway. And the reason I did that is because the Black Pyramid is kind of shown in that it's got the pyramid and then it's got that white background in the astral plane and the astral sea kind of area. So I wanted to have a little bit of an homage to that. Plus, it adds a nice little bit of sweetness to this drink. So these drinks don't happen without some serious support from our community. So I'd like to say thank you to all of our patrons for helping make these drinks happen. In particular, Owen Hutchins, our highlighted patron of today. Should I do that one again?
No, it's fine.
Okay. Cheers. Right. Yes. Okay. Cool. So I've made this drink a whole bunch of times because barrel gin is fun to mess around with, and you can try it in a whole different range of ways. I ended up doing the Manhattan version because I tried it with a martini, like a straight martini, like 5-to-1 ratio of the gin to the vermouth with a little bit of orange bitters in there, because that's what I like in a martini. And it ended up being super bitter. The sweetness of that red vermouth didn't come through. But this version, it's got a slightly more vermouth heavy ratio to turn it into that Manhattan side of things rather than martini side of things. And I think that makes it a little bit more palatable. This is definitely still kind of a bitter drink. This is definitely a very mature adult beverage, you know? There is literally no sugar except for the icing sugar, obviously, that I've put around the rim. A little bit from the vermouth, but really, especially with this vermouth I'm using today, boy, it really does not add that much sweetness. What it does add is a huge amount of really interesting, unusual flavors, which I feel like matches up quite nicely with the board. I mean, I made it, so I know what's in it, but I think that if you gave this, as it stands right now, pure black cocktail, to someone and said, tell me what's in that, they would be very hard pressed to tell you exactly what it is. And that's kind of what the board is like as well. So that's the Black Pyramid from Control. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have enjoyed yourself as much as I have, and you think this little black cocktail is kind of cool. I think it's pretty cool. If you've liked what you've seen here today, please leave us a suggestion for another cocktail or game that you'd like to see. You can also catch us on Reddit, on Facebook, on Twitter. We've got a Discord. And just remember, if you do sign up to be a patron, you get access to some extra goodies, including a recipe book or 2, or 3, which is on the way. We're creating new content every couple of weeks, so I hope to see you then. But until then, cheers.